Chapter 1. What's the open the books. Science. So in chapter 1, first you do sort of like a just a quick synopsis. I think trying to explain that. Well, why don't you take it into your own words? Chapter 1 is broken up into 4 parts. What's the purpose of each of the 4 parts, essentially?
Well, primarily, Chapter 1 is an attempt to introduce the great number of us who are not familiar with the structure or the dimensions or the very existence of the symbol of the Tree of Life, to some of the basic ideas that are ensouled and embodied in this symbol. As we go through the chapters of the book, what we will be doing is inquiring into the oracle. As Peter said, let those who speak as the oracles of God. And the primary oracle that heaven has provided for us as a means of interpreting the mysteries of our own time, the mysteries of reality itself, is the structure of this very ancient symbol called the Tree of Life. So, by inquiring into the oracle, the structure of this symbol, throughout from chapter to chapter to chapter, we will maintain a continuity, a focus, a concentration of the conversation will stay focused on the central meaning of this symbol as we follow the pathways of this symbol of the Tree of Life into the hidden structural mysteries.
Why is it so important? What is the symbol? Why is the symbol so important?
Well, the symbol contains. Well, what we have to do when we understand that we're dealing in matters of the Tree of Life, we have to see how history has been formed around the archetypal image of this symbol. We find the Tree of Life in the 2nd chapter of the book of Genesis. And then we see that God drives man out of the garden, out of a higher state of consciousness, out into the world. And he makes man to be a stranger and a pilgrim and a vagabond in the earth. And we follow the course of history, 6,000 years, 120 jubilees around, in a great circular pattern, until all of a sudden we realize that we have now arrived back at the western ends of the earth, back at the origin of this 6,000-year-old epic. And we are back now in the 2nd chapter of the book of Revelation, where it says, those who overcome will I give to eat of the Tree of Life, which is in the midst of the paradise of God. So we see that the entire scripture, with which we make continuous reference, tedious reference at times, has to do with the ancients' commentary and interpretation, an ongoing interpretation, centuries long conversation, interpretation, commentary on the meaning of this symbol, which is central to our ability to understand and interpret not only the past, but the very present. And of course gives us insights into the future. And of course that's how the prophets were able to look into our times, because they were using the same structural pattern as we will use to decipher and decrypt the writings of the prophets.
So, all of the writings, be they mainline canon or extra biblical, were encrypted using this, an understanding of this symbol?
Well, we have passed on to us a canon, an authorized compilation of texts, which, for obvious reasons, the Spirit, using human intellect as its vehicle, the Spirit has passed down to us.
As well as human motivation at times.
Yes, yes, because it's the Spirit who indwells human consciousness. And it's the Spirit that has her own way, whether we know that she's having her way or not. So it is she that has passed down to us this canon of Scripture that are essential for interpreting the meaning and the nature of the times in which we are. But we see that we have this set of books that have been passed down to us. But alongside of it are hundreds and hundreds of other commentaries and books that basically make up the subtext of the discipline of Kabbalah itself, the Kabbalah. And these books contain the insights, the understandings, the interpretations of hundreds and even thousands of students, adepts, rishis, saints, mystics, who have taken this canon of Scripture and at one level or another have seen into its hidden structure, or have attempted to see into its hidden structure, and have left us a copy of their results, of their insights. And so when we begin to experience revelation for our time, we don't want to imagine that this is something new. In order to maintain the continuity, we must now go back and reference the things we are understanding with the things that were understood centuries and millennia before us, to see if we are maintaining the continuity.
I'm really sorry.
That's right.
Hello? Yeah. Oh. Do you remember where you were?
Well, we were talking about the continuity of interpretation.
Right.
There's a verse in Deuteronomy in the Torah that speaks of thou shalt not break the bones of the crucified victims. And what that means is you shall not disconnect one end of this mystery from the other. And so in the New Testament we read where a bone of him was not broken. And if we do not interpret the times in which we live in the context of the law and the prophets, it is as if we were breaking the bones, disconnecting this mystery from its source and from its fruit. And so we, the tree of life provides that continuity. The structure of the tree provides the pathways for us.
Is it only the Judeo-Christian texts of all natures, even the ones that go beyond the canon, of course, that that use the symbol to decrypt, or if you read the Vedas, will you see the same? Will you be able to use the Tree of Life to decrypt? If you read the Dhammapada, will you be able to use the Tree of Life to decrypt?
Yes, because all theistic religions trace their origins and have their roots in the ancient structure of the Tree of Life. And all of them are the result of the teachings that went out of the Garden of Eden, out of paradise in the thousands of years before the time of Christ, 2,000 years before the Vedic age, before the age of Brahma or Abraham. This mystery went out into the world, and the Tree of Life was the essential structure that God was using to keep or to reveal his and her own thoughts to the minds of man. So in the beginning, in the Garden of Eden, as God began to first imbue man with divine consciousness, it obviously at first was intuitions, insights, revelations, and that prompted man, the new order of humanity, man, to begin to search in new directions for insight, for wisdom. And they, little by little,
It's fine. It's fine.
little by little, as they searched the heavens, as they searched in the earth, the ideas that were forming in the minds of the children of Adam slowly began to take on a structural form. And they began to preserve the understandings that they were accumulating and acquiring in hieroglyphic, archetypal shapes and in archetypal forms. And over the course of the ensuing millennia, the structure and the idea of the Tree of Life that was ultimately passed down to us took form and took shape. And the more perfect the form became, the more concise and the more complex were the ideas that could be relayed from one generation to the other. But even in its complexity, the structure of the Tree of Life is exquisite in its simplicity.
So, the symbol, the actual mandala of the Tree of Life, is something that developed over time.
Developed over thousands of years as a result of the root ideas, the first intuitions that the rishis of old, Manu, Adam, begin to receive from the mind above. And it was in this process of revelation that the new order of man was being formed out of the ancient order of man, the ancient order of the sons of God.
We spoke about Adam and Eve and the concept of the garden back in New York a few months ago. We spent probably an hour or two in the mystical interpretation of it. And assuming that we both understand that Adam is a consciousness, or that the Garden of Eden represents something much more metaphorically than literally,
Mm-hmm.
it's at this, is it that the Tree of Life is so, okay, if you think about, for example, I forget if it was Freud or I think it was Jung who talks about that there are certain archetypes, maybe is the word,
Mm-hmm.
that are just burned into the human psyche. In every birth of every child, there are certain things they're going to absolutely positively react to.
Mm-hmm.
And there are certain dreams every human being is going to always have. For example, fear of darkness or heights or water, and all of these things just carry such deep, deep, deep meaning that even the simplest person on the earth who never put any thought into some of these concepts will have in common with every one of his brothers and sisters on the planet in the human family a common reaction or feeling when put into certain situations or shown certain symbols. Is the tree of life one of these archetypal symbols that is like seared deep into the soul of man, of all man?
Yes, it seems almost certain because even today in the sophistication of the psychological sciences, we're discovering that children seem to be hardwired for certain intellectual, emotional, psychological accomplishments or even failures.
Like what?
And, well, I mean, just our reaction to certain stimuli seems to be a hardwired, acquired, not acquired, but it seems to come built into the organism, and that if we are born into a certain set of emotional, intellectual, and psychological circumstances, the wiring will connect, but it's already there. The pattern, the direction that the neural connections should take are already there, and it just requires, in the dimension into which we are born, it requires a certain amount of stimuli, participation with the outer world. And so the outer world and the inner world, which is already predetermined by nature itself, work hand in hand in fulfilling the creative energies of God. So it takes the outer and the inner world working in balance, one with another. And the reason that the mind is receptive to these ideas that will come to it as it begins to grow is because the mind itself, the psyche, is wired to receive that information.
When certain external conditions and internal conditions are met.
Yes, but of course, the problem with theological discussion is it always falls into the realm of pure intellect. What we must establish at the beginning of any conversation is that once you leave God out of the equation, you will not get to the root or the meaning of the topic. So the reason we can understand archetypal images and enter into the historical meaning of these images is because the divine is seated within our very soul, in our intellect, and it is the divine that provides the impulse for receptivity. It's the divine within us. And if the divine does not open up the consciousness to receive an understanding of those ideas, it means that that particular soul is not ready. And that particular soul must come back and experience several life cycles, maybe.
But sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. But if the soul is now moving into what we call its final cycle, it is attaining to spiritual perfection, that soul will come into the form that it will carry throughout that final lifetime. That mind, that brain, that heart, that soul will all work together according to the instructions that are encoded not only in the tree of life, which will be the stimulus for awakening the mind, but it's encoded in the DNA sequence, because the tree of life and the DNA sequence are mirror images of each other. So that soul that is being prepared for nirvana, for Christ consciousness, for Buddha consciousness, that soul comes hardwired. It comes with all the receptors ready to receive the information.
But I'm trying to find out where the tree of life comes from. And I don't think we can credit it to a particular culture at a particular time. I think
No.
what you're saying is that when a soul grows in age and maturity, it can then receive divine inspiration, and it will very easily imagine a mandala symbol.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, sure, because when Adam, whoever this first archetypal couple is, this male and this female, that are now being chosen out of all of the human beings of their time, chosen to receive this new revelation, the understanding of the unity of God's presence in the sum of all reality. Adam is not the first human beings. Adam is the first monotheist, the first to understand that everything flows from the one. Night, day, light, darkness, good, evil. It all comes from the same single source. And that revelation is revolutionary in that it will lead to the great struggle that is unfolding here in our time between the spirit of light and the spirit of darkness in our time. Because it has to do with the very idea of good and evil, the very idea of light and darkness, the very concept of life and death, not as we perceive it in the physical world, but as we perceive it at a higher level. Life and death literally have to do, and light and darkness is the metaphor that we use to describe a soul that is living at a state of higher consciousness. If we are not living at that state of consciousness, even though we are alive physically, we are dead spiritually. And even Luke will say that in his gospel. He will say that we are as graves that appear not. So what the Great Spirit is doing in Adam, at the time of Adam, is elevating Adam's consciousness to understand that there is a higher meaning to life and death. There is a higher meaning to day and night.
It's an image of his and her likeness, so that we can see a child born live and die, and understand not only that ages are born, live and die, but that each individual's soul, not physical gross body, but spirit, must be born in a physical body, in a sense die to the old self.
Yes.
And so it's just seeing the cycle of birth and death teaches us what the spiritual goal of our individual lives is. And then on a macrocosmic scale, how God's divine plan being introduced, as far as we can ascertain going backwards in time, with the dawn and the age of the monotheists in Adam.
Yes, and well, it brings us back to the very essential meaning of the structure of the Tree of Life. When we look at the cross that defines the center of that symbol, the mandala, we begin to see that that cross defines many of the primal ideas that are intricate to the thinking of every culture on earth. Every culture looks into the heavens and sees a circle. Every culture can divide that circle into a quadrant. Every culture can stand at the center of its own state of awareness and look in four directions. And so that is a primal archetypal design that has the very same basic meaning, or at least it carries with it meanings that everyone can agree with when we sit in a common circle and share our sense of these designs.
I'm glad you brought that up, because the tree of life is not a simple symbol.
No, it has deep complexities.
It's not something that a child would just draw.
Well,
You
children do
wouldn't think.
draw it. Children do draw it. They draw. If you look at the work of children in their drawings, especially if a child is very well adjusted and moving in every proper spiritual and intellectual direction, you will see that the drawings reflect the emergence of the child's intellect, and they will use archetypal symbols, the solar symbols, lunar symbols, trees, life forms, houses that are very basic to geometrical patterns that we find in the symbols. Children draw mothers and fathers, stick figures. Well, these are just preliminary means by which the spirit allows the child to grow up in an understanding of geometrical patterns that will appear later on in very complex forms in the structure of the tree of life, in the lines and in the pathways of the symbol. And as the soul develops, it begins to, well, you can see, you can know, even in a child, if this child is an advanced soul, if it's an old soul, you will see the fire in its eye, you will see the gleam, you will see the inquisitiveness, you will see
Love.
Yes, you will see an old soul, even though it's very little, is already asking very sophisticated questions or saying sophisticated things that make you laugh. You can't imagine how such wisdom came from a child. Children of a very young age are already inquiring into at basic philosophical levels. They're wondering about sexuality. They're thinking about God. They're thinking about right and wrong. They're making moral judgments. You know that this is a very ancient soul who is now being born, especially in our time, coming into the earth, incarnating to help God turn the great wheel of Dharma, to help God end the age and bring into existence the birth and the light of a coming age.
Even if it's 500 years ago and we're not heading toward the end of the age, that premise still applies, because
Yes.
they're perpetuating the family of light that exists on the earth at any given point in time.
Yes.
Or the children of darkness, because a person who grows up to be a great devastating leader also shows those signs in childhood of advanced.
Absolutely, and that's why
intellect
the scripture
and so forth.
says that Satan, which is just a symbol for the collective lower consciousness of man, is more subtle than any beast of the field. Because when Satan appears, even as the scriptures say, in all of its metaphorical and allegorical terms, that when Satan comes, he comes as a minister of righteousness and as an angel of light. And so these two forces are very close to each other, very much akin to each other, very subtly associated and related to each other, so much so that the scripture says it would be almost possible to deceive the very elect, if that were possible. But it's not possible, because it's the Spirit indwelling the elect in every generation, at every time, who authors the means of discernment. It's the Spirit who's looking out from the psyche, from the soul, from the mind, and saying,
Right.
look at that.
It's using the circle of the elect as an instrument
Of its own,
to keep
yes.
to keep the shall I use the pun, the light on the darkness,
Yes.
the
Yes.
attention or the understanding,
Exactly.
so that that understanding never disappears from the human
Yes.
collective conscious
Yes.
as a whole. Otherwise, the darkness would run rampant eternally.
Yes. Yes. Right. And that's another aspect of the tree of life that we must understand. One side of the tree of life is pure mercy and love. The other side is power and judgment. And if there was not this balance in the earth, if there was the absence, if mercy and love did not exist in the earth, if they were not attributes of God, that God was inculcating into man in his own image, then everything would be severe. There would be judgment. There would be harshness at every turn. There would be no grace. There would be no forgiveness. Everything would be instant karma. Everything would be, if you made a mistake, you'd be punished for it at that moment. And it would be like living in an extreme and severe state of concentration and bondage.
Can you give us an example of how subtle the ministers of darkness can appear? In fact, by their very definition, using the words of God?
Well, of course, the means of even identifying the darkness itself and being able to sort it from the light, in essence, shine the light on it, we must have access to the structure of the tree of life, because the tree of life has preserved within its own parameters, within its own dimensions, the mysteries that God has concealed from man. Once we have access to the symbol and we begin to meditate on the symbol, and we begin then, following the promptings of the Spirit, to compare spiritual things with spiritual, always using the symbol. You look at history, you read the scriptural texts, you hear, the scripture says that there are many voices in the earth, and none of them are without signification. Every voice that you hear is emanating from the divine source. So, if you are a proud person, an intellect, a scholar, an academic, and you believe that you already understand at least the basic meaning of this text, and no one can teach you anything else unless it's a fellow academic or a fellow scholar, you will fail. You will absolutely fail to grasp the reasoning of this book. But having access to the oracle and access, a direct line to the meaning of the scriptures, and particularly those scriptures that say, "To this man will I look, who is humble and of the contrite spirit." So, with the oracle in your possession, you begin to open up your eyes and look, and you open up your ears and you begin to hear, and you begin to make inquiry of God. What does this mean? Where does this path lead? How do I interpret? And you begin to ask, you ask, you ask, and all of a sudden, if your heart and mind is open, and only the divine spirit can do that, the answers will begin to come. They will come from the least obvious places. Some drunk on the street will walk up and say something to you, and if you're not humble enough to listen, you will not get the message. And he'll say something that, God, that's what I was asking. That's what I was looking for. And then you just add it to your collection of concepts. Perhaps a book. You just, it's like walking, trusting the force, walking in the Tao. You need to know something, you're looking through Strand's bookstore, looking on the shelves, there's 10,000 books. The one you need will fall into your hand. It will be there. The brochure you need, the inspiration you need, the insight, the idea will all come. It just comes and comes.
How in fact does the book you're looking for fall into your hands?
Well, because you're guided to it. You see that you're no longer working for yourself. Now you're working for the Spirit, and the Spirit has a work for you to do. She's doing the work, and she's just using your hands and your body, and if you're willing, she'll just keep moving you in any direction she wants, and your hand will go, and before you know it, oh yeah, that's what I'm looking for. There's the answer. There's the text.
But there are many individuals who believe they're doing the work of the Spirit.
Everyone is. Everyone is.
Mm-hmm.
The great Orville Lookinghorst, the Lakuta Sut teacher, said that everyone's story is true. Everyone's insight is correct. And it's just a matter, because you see, the scripture says the light of the body is the eye. But if your eye be single, then your whole body shall be full of light. But if thine light in thee be darkness, then how great the darkness. You see, even the children of darkness are walking in the truth of darkness. Every one of us are being directed according to the polarity of our own consciousness.
Yes. Even in relation to what one might call a perfected soul or an attuned individual, those who may appear deluded in their outward efforts are still, in fact, fulfilling their spiritual work on the planet.
Everyone is. You see, even the Antichrist themselves, those sparks of life that energize the spirit of Antichrist in our time, will eventually come back in another time, in another form, and raise themselves up and attain to their own perfection.
And probably in a very powerful way, considering
yes,
all the karma that it's
carrying with it. Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's quite a transformation. There's another image on Earth of the transformation from dark to light, of course.
Darth Vader is the ultimate example in our time. Using modern mythology.
Yet ancient archetype.
Ancient archetype. Yes, exactly.
But what are the requirements of truly being able to trust that? Because many people who may in fact see or hear this videotape, and of course if you're sitting at home right now watching this, at least by our premise here, you're supposed to be. For whatever reason. Even if somebody grabbed you and shoved you down and said, we'll pay you $1,000 to sit here for 15 minutes. But nonetheless, what are the, we all have to sort of make our own transformation and be able to assimilate these concepts slowly. What are the requirements for from the highest spiritual perspective that an individual can leave home with solely their sandals on their feet and a staff in their hand and expect for God to provide them in every way, shape, or form?
Well, they say that over in Palestine, in that city of Jerusalem over there, that they have an entire mental ward set aside for those who appear in that city with severe messianic delusions. Those who have set out with sandals on their feet, staff in hand, wearing sackcloth and ashes, firmly believing that they are the Messiahs, or at least they are the forerunners of Messiahs. The fact is that if you are on the path to spiritual perfection, you will not know it. And it is not until you awaken to the realization that you have been set on a path, unbeknownst to you how you even got there, that you will then begin to realize that you are attended by grace, by an emerging level of perception, of love and compassion for others. You begin to search inwardly and you say, how could I be on this path? I know the dark places I've been through. And you begin to understand that it's grace itself, that it's God's great, immense love for yourself, for the mercy that God is extending to you, that you must now reflect back out. And the virtues that God requires of a perfected soul will indeed begin to emerge in that soul itself. And so those who set out to be Messiah can never attain to it. It's a delusion. But if you don't have a spiritual agenda, but from youth you are just following in the graceful path that God has set before you, it might lead to great turmoil. It might lead to, through dilemma, through psychological struggles, sexual struggles, all kinds of various struggles. But nevertheless, in the context of those struggles, your mind is attaining to wholeness. You're moving through these struggles as just a wave of energy through the water. And finally, you reach the shore and you look back and you say, wow, I've come out of a deep place. And so the scripture's pretty much clear about how you know if a particular individual is attaining to this perfection in the Spirit, because you will know them by the fruit that they bear. The fruit of the Spirit is gentleness, it's love, it's kindness, it's long-suffering, it's tolerance, it's endurance, it's marked by the absence of condemnation of others, acceptance of everyone's path. It's literally, and there we have the scriptures as the reference, the check point. We go to the scriptures and we say, or we realize that if you're walking in a state of Christ consciousness, we'll read the scriptures to see if you are, or at least to see what you should do to be on that path. Or read the teachings of the Buddha, read the commentaries of all the individuals who we generally believe to have attained to this state of consciousness. And the more we adhere ourselves to these teachings and constantly checking ourselves to see if we are indeed in that path, we will come to the required end.
How can we recognize these individuals? Are they dressed in a certain way? Do they have magical powers?
No. Yes, they have.
Are you able to hear the phone?
Yeah, but I don't want to answer it because
Okay.
we're.
I just
Whoops.
wondered if you heard it because I just came in and heard a message.
Can you just keep that out there? Thank you.
Yes, they have access to the most magical power of it all, and that is the power of internal and self-transformation. This is the whole mystery of the alchemist's art. You know, if you're trying to work magic and manipulate the outer realities, then that's what you're doing. You're dabbling in outward things. You're in the exoteric realm, even though you think you're moving around at some esoteric level. And even the alchemists, those who fell into the stream of Hermetic thought that has come out of Egypt from the time of Moses, passed through the time of Christ, and into our own time, this Hermetic science, the science of the alchemist, even they realized that there was something awry with their experimentations because they literally couldn't figure out how to turn lead to gold.
So there weren't any individuals over the course of history who succeeded at converting lead to gold in the physical, literal sense?
Not until the 20th century, where the experimentations of these alchemists led into the field of theoretical physics, into chemistry, into those
Right.
scientific endeavors that led
Right.
to the mathematics and the theories necessary to eventually break the atom.
Right.
And it's only when we could get into, penetrate, not we, but man, was able to penetrate into the hidden structural reality of the created order, does he acquire the means, or at least the know-how, to change lead to gold. But he finds out that if you operate at that level, if you find yourself manipulating with the outer world, fooling around with DNA sequences, mutating or transmutating one element to another, we now see that we have devised the means of our own destruction. So, and this is the lesson that God has clearly laid out for us, but we couldn't see it till the 20th century. I will have no other gods before me. Now, if you want to be a true alchemist, go back and learn what it means. And what it means is that with the philosopher's stone, with the true spiritual elements, you can transform the base natural substance of your own lower nature into the gold of Christ or divine consciousness. And so the true alchemist is the one who studies Kabbalah, because that's what Newton did, that's what Flood and all of the alchemists of those times, they were all students of Kabbalah. They were all students of the ancient mysteries, all of which are ensouled in the structure of that symbol. By meditating on that symbol, you can just travel back in time and begin to take out the ideas, the equations,
What of all these legends, then? Are they simply just that? Because there will undoubtedly be 1,000 people who will say, no, that is not true. This person or this person or this person in their seeming history was able to convert lead to gold.
Well, if they could do it, we would still do it. The capitalist class has not failed to seize on any opportunity it has had in its means and within its grasp to exploit nature to its own means. So if the formula for changing lead to gold literally existed, there'd be somebody who would be sitting, a Scrooge.
So then why do these legends exist?
Well, because we are the product of thousands of years of legend and myth making. Because in reality, the truth exists in the myth and in the legend. This is where the spirit has hid the truth of things.
It's where it becomes palatable.
It's not exactly, because it's in the myth. You see, the Apostle Paul, he says in the book of Ephesians, he says that Christ may dwell in your heart by faith, that ye being rooted and grounded in love. You see, again, he's using the symbolism of the tree of life. He's saying that ye being rooted and grounded in love may understand with all saints what is the length, the breadth, the depth. And then he, 2,000 years before it was discovered, names the fourth dimension, and he calls it the height. And he says that in order to understand anything we are discussing here, anything that in these texts, these sacred texts that have been handed down to us and in which we are commenting on and handing down to you, if you are to understand anything about them, you must stop looking with these eyes, because these are only Euclidean receptors. We can only see 3 dimensions with these eyes. But Paul is saying you must begin to open this eye, the single eye of spiritual intuition. With this eye, the mind, the higher consciousness, we can look into the invisible realm. And with the sight, as it has been called through the centuries, those who have the sight are no longer impeded by physical realities. They look through them. They look, when you're looking at a person on the street, you might look at his eyes to say something, to learn something about him, but you must look at the forehead and to see the soul. You must look into this right here and feel the vibration that's coming out of the mind of the soul. But what we're getting at is the fact that we live at the lower end of a whole series of descending worlds. And all of those worlds are spiritual, and they all interpenetrate and move one upon the other, until finally, here we are down at the bottom of all these worlds, in the worlds of matter, the world of action, as it's called in the Kabbalah. And we see that and understand now what the ancient Vedic teachers have taught us, that it was all Maya, illusion. Now we are able, through the science of 20th century physics, understand exactly what they were talking about. We are all made up of molecules, combinations of elements that were created at the moment of creation itself. Today we were driving through the countryside, and I was sitting there amazed at the passing intuition I was gaining by looking at the redwoods, the birds, the clouds, the ocean, the hillsides, and realizing that I am made up of that. That those things are me and I am them. That my body is made up of trees, clouds, birds, oceans, and I'm just part of this great, magical, immense, natural order, which is wholly spiritual in reality, because it's all divine. Everything, we are made up of molecules. The molecules are made of atoms, the same atoms that go to make up all of nature. The atoms are made up of smaller particles, and when we go deep into the hidden structure of the nucleus of all existence, we're made up out of pure light and energy, and we're made up out of God. There's nothing but God. God is all that exists, and this is where God dwells. Right here. God dwells above, but God dwells below. God dwells in all things. And the Kabbalah teaches us that.
You mentioned that Paul, speaking of the breadth, the width, the depth, and in the height, is referring to the 4th dimension of time-space, that which Einstein has discovered in this past century.
Yes.
How do you come to interpret him as referring to that as the 4th dimension? Others might say something else.
Well, we still are dealing with the concept of consensus. When ideas enter into the mainstream of human thought, a certain amount of time is required, and a certain amount of time unfolds before that which was theoretical begins to take hold upon the thinking. And as it takes hold, it is either by and large proven to be untrue, unaccepted, but if it is true, it will eventually begin to define the consensus of our common understanding. And so Einstein's theory of the space-time continuum, of the concepts of relativity, energy and matter being the same substance, the mysteries of time, space, are by and large accepted by all. And it would take an amazing paradigm shift to throw us off of that track right now. Because Einstein's theory has answered so many questions and has cleared up so many problems.
And is in fact God's intercession in the human evolution.
Absolutely, yes. And it has also led to a deeper understanding of reality, because the basis of Einstein's theory is that light moving through gravitational fields creates a new mathematical relationship. A new equation appears, where now we have to understand, throw away the old, not throw it away, but we have to alter our Euclidean view of the world. It doesn't make sense anymore in the atmosphere of curved spaces. And so those who went to work in Einstein's theory, and particularly as they try to merge those theories with quantum realities that were also appearing in the 20th century, emerging, Einstein's theories led to an understanding of black holes, which at first were theoretical mathematical constructs, but which are now revealing themselves to literally exist in the deepest reaches of space. And black holes in the fabric of time and space absolutely corroborate the teachings of the prophets and their understanding of reincarnation, passing through dimensions from one to the other, or returning back to this dimension, or leaving this dimension altogether into parallel universes. So every little step along the way has led man progressively to a deeper, more esoteric understanding of the nature of reality itself. And that began in the time of Adam, when the very concept of the tree of life was placed in Adam's stream of consciousness.
Ah, I understand. But what in fact gives you okay, what I'm getting at is there anything that backs up your interpretation of what Paul meant in that statement about these 4 dimensions?
Well, immediately I'm reminded of the rebuttal that Muhammad experienced when he was channeling the words of the Quran from the higher dimension into the next. And when he was told and accused of being a charlatan, he said, well, if this is not true, then try to reproduce one like it. See if you can produce such a thing as the Quran. And if you can, and you can produce one better, or one that has more meaning, one that can grasp the heart and the soul of men more than this idea, then go ahead, and then absolutely mine is untrue. So it's the very same concept when Paul, when we understand the meaning of Paul's instruction to us, his teachings, his suggestion that we look into the higher dimension. Well, for 2,000 years, we try to understand what Paul is meaning, but all of a sudden, in the 20th century, eureka, here it is. Paul is talking about this space-time continuum.